Hey everyone. Um, it's September 11th, 2011. And there's been a lot of talk this week about what happened 10 years ago. I can't believe that it's 10 years ago. I can't, it, it seems like it just was yesterday. Um, and it also seems like this distant, horrible nightmare. I'll never forget Mike, my old roommate, had just left like 5 or 6 days beforehand. He moved down to Galveston to go live with his parents or go live near his parents. And he left without a job because he had saved some money and he thought he was going to be fine. So he went down and was going to spend a week or so and then start looking for a job. Well, then the morning of September 11th hit and he was out of work for months. So, anyways, that morning, um, I am an avid Good Morning America fan and have been for years. So that morning I was watching Charlie and Diane like I always did back then. And they cut into themselves because the feed is live in New York, but then is an hour behind in the Central Time Zone. They cut into whatever interview they were doing to announce. Diane Sawyer and Charlie Gibson announced that had been a plane that hit the World Trade Center. And at the time, I was working for Carlson, really doing travel reservations, supervising, managing the center here in Bedford. So I immediately hurried up because back then, before airplanes were used as bombs, that always meant that there was a possibility that we had booked somebody on that flight. When there was a plane crash, I always worried that one of the agents in our office had booked somebody on a flight that crashed and that they would feel like it was their fault because they suggested that flight. So when the first plane hit the towers, I immediately ran to work because I was scared to death that we had booked somebody there and I had to get to work quickly to find out what we knew. At the time, my office was not 10 minutes away. So I very quickly got dressed and got in my car and got to the office. And I ran into the office, and Brian Nelson was standing there and he was crying. And I thought, oh my God, we booked somebody on that flight. Oh my God. And he goes, did you hear? It's horrible. And I said, yeah, I know. Did we book somebody on that flight? He goes, no, there was a second one. And I froze. I couldn't believe it. I immediately called my mom um, and called my brother and just needed to talk to them to make sure they were okay. Through the course of that day, because we worked in travel reservations and U.S. air traffic stopped, we had thousands of people that were stranded. So we immediately went into this emergency mode that we didn't even know existed and kept the center open as light as possible. People were willing to work, whatever we could do. We all felt so helpless that was the least we could do. Um, we then we gathered around the TV and just watched this horrific thing unfold that was happening in New York. There was a woman who worked for us, Carlin Sampson, that her son was in New York and she couldn't get a hold of him. We were all so scared for her. It comes back so quick. Um, we were so scared for her, and she finally got an email from him, like a couple hours later, because nobody in New York could call out. Um, and it was just so frightening, and the fabric of our lives was gone. It just, in an instant, in one single day, these horrible acts that people had done against us, against America, were done against us. And it was so, it hurt so bad. And I just wanted to be around the people that I loved. And I was so worried about the people that I knew in New York and even people that I didn't, and what this was going to do to us. And then this Flight 93 happened in Pennsylvania, and then the flight into the Pentagon. And we didn't know what was happening. We didn't know if there was going to be another one. My friend Todd worked for the Star Telegram, and I called him just to make sure he was okay. There was no reason to think that he wasn't. And there were, at the time, 4 or 5 pieces of aircraft that were still missing, that had not been grounded yet. And we were scared that that meant that there were more terrorists, that they just hadn't found their target yet. And we got word, and I'm sure it was rumor or just fear, but Todd called me and said, be careful. One of the missing planes appears to be somewhere over DFW. And it scared me because our office was so close to DFW. I thought, oh my God, what if they hit our building? And I didn't tell anybody that in the office because I didn't want them to panic. I didn't want because there wasn't anything we could do, and there was nothing to substantiate that that was true. But I remember being scared to death, and watching the coverage, and the disbelief of all the newscasters that were in New York that were looking at what was happening and not being able to put it into words. I remember the incredible strength of Mayor Rudy Giuliani and how he kind of brought this country together. I will say this, I do remember the strength of George W. Bush. We needed a leader at that time, and he did provide that. I don't know that he responded correctly. I don't know that, he squandered whatever he did in the rest of his presidency. We needed to look up to a leader, and he provided that leadership, and for that, I'm grateful to him. As the days went on and air traffic continued to be grounded because the FAA didn't know when it was safe for people to be able to travel again, and how did we get back to that? We kept our phone lines open almost 24 hours a day, because we had thousands of people that were stranded all over the country, and I hadn't taken reservations in 5 years, 6 years, but I got on the phones, of course, and I remember very clearly. I took a call. It was midnight, maybe 1 o'clock in the morning, and we had heard rumors that the next day they were going to start air traffic again. So people had started to call to try to find some way to get home. And, because the rest of the world was doing that, finding space was difficult, to say the least. And this guy called me, and he was on the West Coast, San Francisco, I believe. And he said he needed to get home, because this was 3 days later. This was on the 14th. He needed to get home. He didn't care how it happened, because he couldn't listen to his 3-year-old daughter, who lived in Connecticut. He couldn't listen to her on the phone anymore, crying, praying for her daddy to come home. And this guy just affected me, and I was going to get him home. I was going to get him home somehow. So I found a flight from San Francisco to Dallas that was available. But there wasn't anything available to get him any farther. And I told him, I said, you get to Dallas and you can stay at my house. You'll at least be halfway home. And then I'll take you back to the airport the next day for your flight home. And he was so grateful. I had to get this guy home. As it turns out, the next day, air traffic didn't start again. But I followed his reservation because he was, for whatever reason, he was the one thing that I could do to help someone, and I wanted to help someone. He ended up getting home a couple of days later, and I called him at home because I had access to his home phone number. And I called him at home and just wanted to make sure that he was okay, and that he got home okay, and that his daughter was okay. And he was very touched by that. The whole experience, it changed who we were. It changed how the world looked at America. It did bring a lot of good things to this country. Um, Not that I would ever want attacks like that to happen again, but it did bring us together. We've splintered so far from that, which is a shame. Um, and I'm hoping that this significant anniversary of a decade having passed, that people look back and remember what it was like in the days and months that followed those horrible, horrible attacks. Um, and remember the camaraderie and how united these United States were, and how we wanted to help each other and not fight with each other, that we fought our true enemies and not ourselves. I think we've lost sight of that, particularly in recent years, which is a shame. Um, they're just, uh, it was an incredible time for this country and for everybody. I don't know that anyone will ever, ever forget the events of that day. I hope we don't ever forget. Um, I'm looking forward to seeing the memorial next time I'm in New York, just because it uh, it's about time that the memorial is there, and that we remember the thousands of people who so innocently lost their lives that day. Um, it's so tragic that there are children that are missing their parents because somebody hated us so much and decided to fly a plane into those buildings. It amazes me. I do remember very vividly when Rudy Giuliani continued to say, go back to work. Make sure that the terrorists don't win. Show them that we are stronger. And I remember the Broadway community, of course, being greatly affected. The shows were shut down for at least a couple of days, I think. I remember the casts of everything that was running that day, at that time, got together in Times Square and sang New York, New York, as kind of an invitation to the world to come back and come back to the healing power of theater. That always struck me as something pretty mesmerizing. A couple of years after 9/11, Philip and I went up to New York, and we were lucky enough to see the last revival of La Cage aux Folles that starred Gary Beach. Philip's friend Michael Benjamin Washington was in it. He was playing Jacob, and we went and had drinks with him afterwards. And this was in 2005, so it had been in the very recent past that 9/11 had happened. He was rehearsing Mamma Mia. He was in the original company of Mamma Mia, and he lost his partner that day. His partner worked in the World Trade Center, and he lost his partner. And he said, Mamma Mia and those people and those songs, and the sheer ridiculousness of that show and the joy of that is what kept him alive. That's how he survived. He survived through the family that is theater. And I think that's pretty powerful. So as this day passes, take a moment to remember those that so innocently gave their lives. Remember those husbands and wives who lost their spouse, and children who lost their parents, and parents who lost their children. Remember them, and remember who we are and why we are so strong and how we were able to come back from that. Thanks, y'all. Thanks for letting me talk about this.